Progressivism seeks to replace the basic premises of the Declaration of Independence, and hence our form of government. It holds that our rights and our dignities come not from God, but from government. It requires of the people a subservience and weakness incompatible with a constitution premised on the transcendent origin of our rights.
Something feels off right now, and even people who don't follow politics closely can feel it. You see it in everyday conversations, you see it in the new way people talk about their rights, their freedoms, even their future. And there's this underlying intention that's hard to explain, but it keeps showing up. And then you hear a statement like this from a sitting Supreme Court justice. And it kind of just put a spotlight on what a lot of people have been sensing, but couldn't quite put it into words. A Supreme Court, the highest court of the land, the law of the land, a judge, Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas. The idea is simple, but it's powerful. Are our rights something we are born with, or are they something the government gives us? Because depending on how you answer that question, everything starts to look very different. In my view, that's what this whole conversation comes down to. It's not just political, it's foundational. It's about how this country operates at its core. And when you hear someone at the highest level of the judicial system talk about rights coming from something higher than government, that stands out, at least to me. Not because it's flashy, but because it's clear. It cuts through a lot of the noise. Now, whether someone agrees with that or not, it raises a real question. What happens when a society starts shifting away from that idea? What does that actually look like in real life? Because this isn't just theory. This plays out in policies and schools and communities and everyday decisions that affect regular people. And a lot of the frustration people feel right now, whether they can articulate it or not, ties back to the exact issue. So in this video, I want to break down this in a way that actually makes sense, not overcomplicated language, no political word salad games, just real talk about what this means, how it shows up in the real world, and why people are paying attention to it right now. So hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel. And now, this whole conversation about where rights come from might sound like something abstract, just general idea broad. And it shows up in real life, whether people realize it or not. And this isn't just a debate for politicians or lawyers. It affects how laws are written, how they're enforced, and how people experience everyday life. Because if rights come from the government, then the government can change them. It can expand them, limit them, or redefine them, depending on who's in charge. But if rights come from something higher, if they're built into who we are, then the government's job is supposed to protect those rights, not control them. That's a completely different setup. And in my view, this is where a lot of people start to feel like something isn't adding up. Think about what we saw during the pandemic. You had small businesses being forced to shut down, churches being restricted, people being told where they could go and when. At the same time, other activities were treated differently depending on how they were labeled. Now, regardless of where someone stands on these situations or these decisions or those decisions, what stood out to a lot of people was inconsistency. It felt like rights weren't fixed, they felt conditional. And when people start to feel like their freedoms depend on changing rules, that's when trust starts to break down. Here's what this actually looks like day to day. A business owner wondering if new rules are going to shut them down again. A parent trying to figure out where their kid is being taught in school. An employee thinking twice before speaking up because they don't know how it might affect their job. These are normal people dealing with uncertainty. And then you add in the cultural side of it. When there's no shared baseline, no clear standard, everything starts to feel negotiable. You can see this in major cities like Chicago, New York, and San Francisco, where policies around crime and enforcement have shifted over time. From my perspective, what this looks like on the ground is confusion. Residents aren't always sure what's going to be enforced. Business owners don't know what to expect, and people are left adjusting to rules that seem to keep changing. And that leads into something else that doesn't always get explained clearly: the difference between a republic and a pure democracy. People use those terms like they mean the same thing, but they don't. A republic is built on laws that are meant to stay consistent regardless of what people feel in the moment. A pure democracy leans more on majority rule, which sounds fair, but it also means things can change quickly depending on who has the numbers. Think about it like this. If the rules shift every election cycle, it becomes harder for people to plan their lives. Businesses hesitate to invest, families feel uncertain, and long-term stability starts to weaken. That's what people are reacting to. even if they don't always explain it that way. It's not just about politics, it's about stability, predictability, and knowing where the lines are. Think about it like this. When the country was founded, the idea wasn't that government would create rights. The idea was that rights already existed and the Constitution was written to protect them. That's why the language in the Declaration of Independence is so direct. It points to a creator, not a system, as the source of those rights. Now, someone might hear that and say, well, times have changed. And that's fair. That's a fair point to bring up. Society evolves, technology changes, new situations come up that the founders couldn't have predicted. But here's where it gets complicated. If the foundation itself is always shifting, if the standard keeps moving, then it becomes harder to measure anything, to see the real results. It becomes harder to say what's right, what's protected, and what's not. From my perspective, something has to stay stable. Otherwise, everything turns into interpretation, how you see it. And when everything becomes interpretation, it often comes to who has the most influence at the moment. And that's where people start using words like chaos, not necessarily meaning everything falls apart overnight, but meaning there's no clear line anymore. You can see a version of this in the education system. Parents in different parts of the country have raised concerns about not always knowing what's being taught in classrooms or feeling like they're being brought in after decisions are already made. Whether someone agrees with those concerns or not, the underlying issue is consistency and transparency. People want to understand the standards being used. The same goes for the conversation around family structure. This doesn't have to be framed in a dramatic way to be understood. Strong families tend to create more stable communities. That's been observed across different cultures and time periods. When that structure weakens, other systems often have to step in to fill in the gap or fill the gap. Whether that's through increased public spending or expanded programs. That's not a judgment. It's just how the chain reaction tends to work. Now, to be fair, there are people who believe that government should play a larger role in defining and adapting rights over time. The argument is that this allows society to become more inclusive and responsive. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. Well, here's where the concern comes in. If rights are always being redefined and then they're not really rights, if rights are always being redefined, then they're not really rights in their original sense. They are policies, and policies can change. They can be expanded, but then they can also be rolled back. So the question becomes, is that a stable foundation long term? That's the part people are debating right now, whether they realize it or not. At the end of the day, this conversation isn't really about one person, one speech, or one moment. It's about a bigger pattern that people are starting to notice. It's about how we define rights, where we believe they come from, and what role government is supposed to play in that process. And from my perspective, when those lines start to blur, people feel it in their everyday lives. They feel it when rules seem inconsistent, when expectations keep changing, and when it's not clear what's actually protected anymore. And that's where a lot of frustration comes from, the frustration. Not everyone is going to agree on the role of religion or how it connects to government. And that's part of living in a diverse country. But the underlying question still matters because it shapes everything else. It shapes laws, it shapes culture, it shapes how people interact with the system around them. And when someone at the highest level of the judicial system brings that question back into focus, it's worth paying attention to. Not emotionally, not reactively, but thoughtfully. Because this isn't just about politics, it's about stability, clarity, and the kind of framework people are expected to live under every day. Right? In my view, that's why this conversation keeps coming up. And it's why it's not going anywhere anytime soon. But I'm curious to how you see it, right? Because the main goal of my message here is this. I'm arguing that the foundation of America works best when rights are understood as something inherent and protected, not something granted and adjusted by government, right? Because from my perspective, once that foundation shifts, everything built on top of it, laws, culture, education, and everyday life, starts to feel unstable or inconsistent. And the purpose I use Clarence Thomas quote, or him saying what he said in the clip, in his words, referring to it and tying it together, is to reinforce that idea from someone who sits at the highest level of the judicial system in on this land, the United States. It gives weight to the argument. It's basically me saying this isn't just a random opinion. This is a perspective that exists inside the court system that interprets the Constitution itself. Now, if we simplify what the quote is really getting at, it comes down to this. If rights come from God, a higher fixed source, then they're not supposed to change based on politics. The government's role is to protect them. If rights come from government, then they can shift depending on the laws, leadership, or public opinion. And that's the tension, right? And as for what action, right? And the way I'm looking at it is I'm just encouraging you guys to pay attention to where policies are coming from. Think critically about whether rights are being protected or redefined. And stay informed instead of just reacting emotionally, right? Engage in the system, voting, discussions like we're having right now, just a productive conversation, local involvement. I'm not here to sway you to do anything, but just be informed and involvement, right? Your civic duty, right? Because not to mention individuals, you have to realize that it's bigger than you. Every time you vote and get involved with voting and stuff like that, you're helping the next person who may not be capable of being able to do their civic duty, such as being able to vote. For example, like those who may have a disability and it happens to be out of their control, and they have inherently have been, born with some type of disability or, something medical that may not allow them to vote. But your vote can help keep things in the right direction to help those. And that's why I say it's bigger than you, right? So every time you vote and get involved, you're helping the next person who can't. But value stable principles over constantly changing standards, right? And from my perspective, the action here isn't panic, it's awareness. It's understanding what's actually happening, asking the right questions. What kind of foundation you want this country built on moving forward? So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I think this is an amazing discussion. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed my take. And catch you next one. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. As always, we're just having a conversation. Peace.